Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Wow.
Thanks for sticking around. By the way, I just want to let you know, I'm not going to hog all the time asking questions. You guys know you have cards out there, so scribble down your questions. In about 20 minutes, I'll let you guys take over.
We're going to light a little fire and make some s'mores later on, okay? It's not going to be that time.
Sing some songs. So Emilio, you said in one interview, I've watched a lot of interviews, but this one line really struck me. I don't make movies with agendas. I make movies because I want to tell stories.
That's right.
So when you really think about this film, what is the story?
So I felt over the years, because it took a long time to make this picture. Well, it took 12 years. In fact, I started this process April 1st, 2007. And it began with an article in the LA Times that was written, that's right, written off by Chip Ward. And it was about how libraries have become de facto homeless shelters and how librarians are now tasked with being first responders and de facto social workers. And so I was so moved by it that I felt that it was over the years that it didn't get made, that the script that I wrote, the first draft, which needed a lot of work, which over the next 10 years did get addressed and I did a lot of work on. I felt a moral imperative to make this film. I felt that as time passed, the stories in the script were unfolding in real time on the news. And so it felt like as the years went on, the story and the script and the movie felt more relevant. And so I couldn't let it go. And so what I think that this film shares in common with the work that I've been doing for the last 20 years, starting with The Ward Home, where I played 22 years ago, where I played a Vietnam vet suffering from PTSD, and then we made Bobby about the day Bobby Kennedy was shot, and then The Way, which was a few years ago, all informed this film. And what these movies have in common is they are about a shared trauma, they are about a shared humanity, and I don't believe that any of us walk the planet pain-free, that we all have a certain amount of trauma. And that is reflected not only in these movies, but that is also reflected in all of these characters in the film. And so I was driven to tell this story at this time. And as Alex said in early days when we first started talking about the picture, that this movie is about everything that's happening in the country now. And I just couldn't let it go.
What's the story to you of this film, Alec?
Well, I mean, I think that he's articulated that very well. For me, the impact has been that I can't drive by a library again and not have a different perspective about what's going on inside that building. When I was a child, a library had a certain function, and they had the old bookmobiles on the South Shore of Long Island that would park in little residential parking spots, and you go there and check out your books in this little pod of a trailer and so forth. And my wife and I have a charitable foundation where we did some fundraising for the addition of a children's wing at the East Hampton Library on Long Island, where we were very dedicated to that project of raising that money. Bob Stern, the famous Robert A.M. Stern, designed the wing, and a really beautiful addition to this library. And in that zone, so to speak, I read an article about a couple of libraries, or like 3 libraries in Iowa, and the writer from the Times discussed the difficulties of these little libraries in Iowa. And long story short, as I called the librarian from one of them, and I said, if my wife and I were to send you some money for your facility, I'm just curious, what would you need it for? And she said, food. She said, we don't want any books. She said, books we've got. And she said, our budget for the year is $5,000. She said, everybody in the building is, I mean, they get some outside contribution from the state or city, and she said, everybody is volunteer or like ridiculously part-time, and they have very limited hours. And she goes, but we need food, because kids come here and they haven't eaten. And they're asking us for a juice box, they're asking us for a snack. I mean, the roles that they're asked to play, sometimes forced to play in their community, is something that was just unknown to me.
So this article that Amelia is referring to is called Written Off, and it was by a gentleman named Chip Ward. who worked in Salt Lake City. And you've been going and touring around the country,
right.
and you and Chip hooked up.
We did.
In Salt Lake?
We met for the first time face to face.
What was that like?
A couple of weeks ago. He's a dear man. He has, over the years, has been a source of strength and encouragement for me, and in many ways, a North Star. And he would, as the film would get going and then fall apart, he would send an email and say, hang in there, the story needs to be told, the story will be told eventually, and it's just going to be, it's just all about timing.
Do you mind reading a passage from this that I highlighted? Are you a glasses person? Or?
I'm not a glasses person, but...
Okay. Where they asked her...
He just looks like he needs glasses.
However, we're about to find out.
Just that passage, it's just really beautifully written, and I think you'll understand why Emilio was so drawn to this piece.
In bad weather, most of the homeless have nowhere to go but public places. Local shelters push them out at 6 in the morning, and even when the weather is good, they are already lining up by the time the library opens at 9 because they want to sit down and recover from the chilly dawn or use the restrooms. Fast food restaurants, hotel lobbies, office foyers, and shopping malls do not tolerate them for long. Public libraries, on the other hand, are open and tolerant, even inviting and entertaining places for them to seek refuge from a world that will not abide their often disheveled and odorous presentation, their odd and sometimes obnoxious behaviors, and the awkward challenges that they present.
You've been going around the country to libraries. I follow the Instagram account for this, and you're...
Thank you.
But every time I look down, it's like, oh, Emilio's going live from Boulder. Oh, Emilio's going live from San Francisco. You've been all over the country.
This is our 30th stop along the way, and we started in January, and there were a couple of little breaks in between, but for the most part, we have had an event every day leading up to our arrival in New York on Sunday night. It's been extraordinary. We started at ALA conference up in Seattle, so screening for librarians specifically. We've screened for mental health advocates and their groups. We've screened for homeless advocates, and we've screened for homeless individuals as well at shelters. And it's been very emotional and very rewarding because this is a film that celebrates the poor, the misfits, the outcasts, the marginalized. And these individuals who we screened the film for are now seeing themselves on screen, and they're empowered, and they're seeing themselves in heroic roles. And they're feeling, as they've related back to me, they're feeling heard, maybe for the first time in their lives.
Representation matters. It really does.
Indeed. And so it's been very rewarding and very gratifying, this entire experience, to be able to share the film. And again, we don't have a big studio budget to go out and market this thing, so we've taken the movie to the people in the hopes that we'd create a grassroots movement for the film, and I believe we have. Big Hollywood films oftentimes go out there like big oil companies. You have to think, and they go down out there with their big rigs and they drill down into your wallets and they extract large sums of cash. And I've been out there like with a divining rod and a shaman, trying to figure it out. But we've touched people, and we've managed to I think make a difference, and hopefully there's a movement here, that there's a conversation that has started. And if you haven't started a conversation, you're already in one about how to solve this. Because homelessness is it's not a condition, it's a situation. And it's relatively new. Homelessness began in the 80s after the Mental Health Services Act was undone by the next administration, and the omnibus budget, which crushed HUD and defunded it by 77%. And then the Clinton Welfare Reform Act. So it was like 3 strikes, and this has gotten us to the place we're at right now. And so, but it's solvable. I do believe it's solvable if there's a collective will to do this.
So Emilio was working on the script for 10 years. Once it got to you, Alec, when you first read it, what jumped out to you about it as a script?
Everybody here saw the movie, right? Yeah. Well, I knew right away I did not want to be naked in the Cincinnati. I chose to not examine one of those roles in the film. But he came to me and said, did you want to play this hostage negotiator, this crisis negotiator? And I said, sure. And again, we've said this many times in each other's presence, which is that in this business, Emilio, along with a handful of other people I've encountered over the years, represents somebody who, if you're available, you always say yes. It's not about the money. It's not about, and even if the part is a smaller role that you might ordinarily not want to do, you want to be in one of his movies because they don't come around that often, these movies that have a social content and deal with some kind of social justice or his unique perspective on history, like the Kennedy assassination and so forth. And I read it, and as is often the case, I don't think, oh, what's my part? I think, what's the movie, and do I want to be in that movie? And I've done that maybe to a fault over the years, where I'm like, no, I don't want to play Iron Man. I'd rather play the hostage negotiator in Emilio Estevez film on homelessness. No, I'm joking. But the point is, you really think about the movie, and you know, there's like a handful of people who you think, if they call, you want to go.
And how you also want to spend your time, how you want to do your art. I mean, that's important to you too as an actor. I have to imagine. Plus,
in terms of what you say, things like this are less and less and less as time goes on. Like, we're at a point now, and this is just my perspective, is that in the arc of a kind of one for them, one for me model, in the arc of a thing where it's like, I'm going to go do a money gig, then I'm going to do one for my soul. The one for my soul now is almost exclusively going to the theater. Mm-hmm. You know, like you do a money gig and you do a less money gig, and none of it's really that enriching to you that way. And so you wind up running back to do a play because it's more complicated and deeper material. But with him, plus he has that wonderful ability he's demonstrated to get the most horrific part of the job is to raise the money, to get investors to come. I mean, if we made a documentary film for you about how movies are made now, I really think you'd be stunned what a task it is to raise money for movies and what you go through.
And oftentimes the easiest part is the making of it.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I'll finish with this, but which is, I have a movie that's in the Tribeca Film Festival this year, which is a movie called Crown Vic. It's a two-hander about two cops, like a training day, older cop, younger cop. And I was going to star in the movie, and we had two financial, you know, we baked the souffle twice, and it rose and it rose and it rose and then it fell. and we lost this co-star, and we lost the financing, and it's very, very frustrating. So with him, he's a wonderful actor, he's a wonderful director. I've stressed ad infinitum what a wonderful writer he is. And he's also a wonderful producer because he gets the money to make the movie, and then he sells the movie, which is another incredibly difficult task these days, is to get the movie distributed.
When you were out in the process of raising money, without naming names, was there any meeting you took where you thought, and the person was really negative, and you just wanted to like stomach punch the guy? Like just, or gal, like just had one of those reactions?
There's a list.
There's a list?
Yeah, there's a list. Actually, I mean, listen, I know that when I walk into an office,
violence is not a means to an end.
As the film certainly proves, really. Right? This is a film about nonviolent civil disobedience.
I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
We can move on. The film was shot in 22 days,
yes.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
As a director, what's great about that? And then, it may seem like an obvious question, but what's tough about that?
So, the great thing is that you don't have a whole lot of time to overthink the day. And so it's all about planning, it's all about prep. And of course, because I'd had 10 years to marinate in this, I had better be planned. I had better show up knowing where I was going to put the camera. And if I showed up not knowing my lines, I think he would have looked at me and said, "Are you kidding me?" So there was a lot of time for me to think about this. The downside is that you only have 4 days with this certain actor. You have 6 days with Gabrielle. You have Jeffrey Wright is in and out of town, and Alec has 6 days, 5 days, whatever the schedule ended up being. And so the onus is then on me, and of course my editor. I have an amazing editor that I've worked with now 3 times, Richard Chu, who won the Oscar for the first Star Wars. He cut Risky Business. He cut The Conversation, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So he's a seasoned pro. So I then turn the footage over to him and I say, make it look like all these people were here at the same time. And then I go away. No, that's not true. But it was that process, the editing process, was protracted because of that. It was really a 2-year process of cutting this picture to get it to the length, to get the rating that we wanted, and then obviously to land a distributor that got it, that understood what I was working towards, and that I knew, especially now after this long tour, that this is a movie that plays with audiences. This is not a day and date movie. This is not a movie that goes direct to VOD. This is a film that is a shared experience because it's about our shared experience. And when you see the film, whether it's in a crowd this size tonight or last Friday we screened in Cincinnati where we made the film for 2,400 people, or Toronto Film Festival for 2,500 people, the movie plays with an audience, and it's very entertaining. And I think when when you look at this with the story on paper, you say, well, a movie in Librarians, Homelessness, mental, it's like, but then it's surprisingly funny, and I think that really disarms people.
That was actually my next question, but go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, you. Go ahead.
My question was going to be, it's difficult subjects, and then there are these laughs, and Alec, you're a great comic actor, you're a serious actor. What's that balance like? How do you find that balance?
When you make a movie, you say to yourself, first of all, you have no hope of making a good film if you don't have a good script. I've done films with actors and directors who were all very competent, some of them very gifted people, and you knew that if everybody came to work and did their job perfectly, mediocrity was still the best we could hope for. Because the material just doesn't support that. So again, I tip my hat to him as a writer. You read the script and you saw the humor that was there, it's on the page. If it's not on the page, when people say we're going to do some serious rewriting of a screenplay while we're shooting the film, I always think that's like fixing the car while we're driving the car, which is a very difficult thing to try to pull off, I would imagine. And so you look at the script, and I used to get excited. I go, well, it's this movie star and this actress, and they're going to pay me, and we're going to go to Paris, and I look at it and I go, I still don't get it. I once had my agent call me up and go, would you do me a favor? I was offered a movie that was the most money I was ever offered to star in a film. And I said no. I read it. I was like, God, I wanted so badly to like this script. You have no idea how much I wanted to like this script. And my agent said, would you do me a favor? Would you come over to my office and read the script again underneath a special lamp that I have in my office? Projects onto the script the amount of money they're going to pay to do this. Would you do that for me? Would you read it one more time? And this, what is that sound, by the way? It sounds like a monster coming out of the cellar.
Is it the mic? No?
Is it us?
It might be us.
Oh, is it me? Yes.
Settle, Baldwin.
We have a special guest here, right? You can go to sleep if you want to, darling. It's okay. We have a very young
past my
person
bedtime
here
too.
Who looks like she's about to go to sleep. I would too. But to finish this, which is that little things that add up to, like, how do you make a good movie? One shot at a time. How do you make a good movie? Everybody is willing to trust each other and the director. And one of the keys is to have a director like him. He's a very unique guy because in spite of all this difficulty, in spite of all these obstacles he has to overcome in order to get on the set shooting and to actually start making the film, he does not transmit any of his tension to the cast, which is kind of rare. When you work in the high-stakes pressure game of like almost micro-budget movies, I mean, I do Mission Impossible, and the budget of his movie is the budget for Tic Tacs on Mission Impossible. for ice, you know what I mean? And it's like some of these movies, and he was in the first Mission Impossible, by the way, as we remember. But my point is that when you have a limited amount of money and all the three-dimensional chess game of the cast, all these different things, it can be very, very stressful, and yet he transmits none of his... I'm about to lose my own.
There we go.
Hey!
Hey!
He does not transmit any of his tension to the cast, and that was really, really
Well, because
admirable.
it's not your business, right? To take on that anxiety and that tension, and I've been obviously on all sides of it, and so I know what it feels like when a director, when a producer is sharing that with the actors and bringing them into their pain, and that process, and that's part of this of the sausage that I don't want to see made when I'm simply acting, and so. But I want to just add that when Alec said yes, it was such a vote of confidence for me because it had taken so long to get the film made. And he says, I love the script. I want to participate. I want to be in this. And you know, for many years, especially lately, we know him as a comedic actor. But that's not how I was introduced to him. And so the idea that he would step into this role and play this very dramatic character, it was an opportunity, I thought, to remind people just how brilliant he is when given the material and the opportunity. And so when the camera's on him, you've seen the film. And it's the same with a lot of the actors. We just hold, and that is the confidence I have in Alec and the other actors to say, I trust you. I'm not going to count on the cut to get us to the emotion. It's all happening on screen. There's thought unraveling. There's process happening on screen, and it's like long-form arithmetic. And I want to see it, and he was giving it every step of the way.
I'm just going to ask a few more questions, and then we'll get to your questions. And then we have a couple of special guests we want to bring on the stage to talk about some of the issues in the film. Who's a behind-the-scenes hero on this film? Someone that we haven't talked about, or maybe hasn't necessarily got recognition in press, you think really?
The city of Cincinnati is the behind-the-scenes hero here. The movie could not have been made without the support of the city, without the support of the Film Commission, without the support of the state of Ohio, because essentially, again, with a budget like this, we need to go to a state that has a tax incentive, and they essentially become your partner. So Ohio has an amazing tax incentive. They came to the table, and they helped us produce the movie. So the city of Cincinnati, the mayor's office, the police department, locations, the library, of course, they all said, okay, we get it. We want to help you get this made. What's it going to take? So those, it's hard to really quantify what those numbers are, but it's in the millions. That's money that is all on screen. This movie doesn't look like a small independent movie, and the city of Cincinnati is responsible for that, along with the DP, of course. But yeah.
And you've made Cincinnati a base for yourself.
I have, yeah. I'm spending a lot of time there. Yeah. Yes, Cincinnati's in the house. All right. No, it's a gorgeous city, and there's a lot going on there with in terms of the arts. The arts are very well supported in the city, and it's only an hour and a half from New York.
And Graeter's Ice Cream.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Great.
It's the home of Graeter's Ice Cream.
Graeter's Ice Cream. That's right.
Reason enough to move to Cincinnati.
For real.
That's so funny you said that.
It's very much an ensemble piece. As an actor, as actors, we're talking as the writer and the director, now as actors, what do you like about working in an ensemble?
It's like being part of a team. And you're only as good as the team you surround yourself with. And when you lean into your fellow actors, as I did, and you know that if you have to hand it off, they can take the ball and run for another 10 yards. And if they need to hand it off, he can pass it off to Jeffrey Wright. And certainly Michael K. Williams is right there to take it again and run with it. So it's we leaned in and leaned on each other. And that's the great thing about working on ensemble films. Some of the most successful films that I've been associated with have been ensembles, and so that's where I've really thrived as an actor.
How about for you, Alec?
I think that when you make it on a film like that, it's the opportunity to enjoy people that you really wanted to work with. You know, I've always wanted to work with Jeffrey Wright. You know, I sit home and binge Westworld like a lot of other people and sit there and go, man, I want to work with him one day. And I met him before, you know. And a variety of other people that are, I mean, Michael Kay, I sat home and it was just completely drugged by the series The Night Of, and loved Riz Ahmed and fell in love with, you know, Zalian wrote the screenplay and directed with. Richard Price was one of the writers, all this really incredible group of people. Jeannie Berlin playing that prosecutor. What a great group of people. Totoro.
Bill Camp.
Yeah, Bill Camp. I mean, it was just flawless, the people. And then I'm on the set with Michael Kay. You know, you always dream, like when I did Glengarry, things like that, where you're working with people that you really, people you've loved.
Yeah.
And then you're on the set with them, and it's really it's a real opportunity and a joy.
Obviously, homelessness is the overarching issue of the film, but there are a lot of little subtle nods to other issues. At one point, you hear something about Narcan briefly in the back,
That's
and
right.
I think you know in Philadelphia's librarians can now administer Narcan.
That's right. Most actually in
Right.
urban libraries are empowering librarians to get, as long as they're trained, to administer Narcan. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was just wondering, when you talk to the librarians about having to take on this additional role, what do they tell you?
They're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
There is a program that started in San Francisco where they began to bring in social workers to help lighten the load, because again, librarians, they're not LCSWs. They have a degree in library science. They are built to do a job that is, again, librarians were Google before Google, right? And they're still providing that service, but they're not skilled, nor should we lean into them and ask them to be social workers. And so what's happening around the country is that social workers are now being brought into libraries and helping out and really being that other leg on that stool that is helping to solve the issues.
We've got our last 15 minutes, so I want to get some of those questions in, and I also want to bring out our special guests. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to take those, and we'll welcome out our special guests.
Hello.
Emilio, will you help me out while I read these cards? Will you introduce our guests?
Sure.
We introduce them?
Yes.
Thanks.
Ryan Dowd. Ryan Dowd wrote a book called The Librarian's Guide to Homelessness. It came out last year as we were beginning to screen the film. Ryan was in the crowd. I invited him to join us for one of the first screenings in Santa Barbara. And as the questions started coming in, I felt like I was in the deep end of the pool, and I want to stay in my lane. I'm not a librarian. I'm not an LCSW. I don't run a homeless shelter, but Ryan does. And I pulled him out of the crowd, and I said, I think you're going to take this one. And so we've been on the road ever since. Ryan also runs the second largest homeless shelter in the state of Illinois, called Hesed House, where he's been working there since you were 13 years old. Yes, and you're now the executive director. And he's also my friend.
And David, would you introduce
Oh,
yourself?
hi, I'm Dave Giffin. I'm the executive director of the Coalition for the Homeless here in New York City.
So thank you both for being here, and I think a lot of these questions you'll be able to help answer.
I hope so.
This first one is, thank you for making this film, for bringing awareness to a growing problem. Oregon has tent cities, there's San Francisco and countless other places. How do we help as individuals? What can we do?
Well, that is a great question. I think the first thing to do is to not accept that this is the way things are. You know, I've been in New York long enough to remember when this was not a problem, when there weren't hundreds of thousands of people who were in need of affordable housing, when we had alternatives for people. And you know, it was in the late 70s and the early 80s that the problem really mushroomed in this city, and there was tremendous outrage at the time. New Yorkers said, no, this is not the city we live in and not the way things should be. But lo and behold, now it's been about 40 years since the crisis emerged, and my greatest fear is that it's become normalized, that we think that this is our city. But it's not. This is not the way things have to be. And I heard you say this before, Emilio, that there are solutions to this. And that's one thing you have to keep in mind. Things don't have to be this way. It's not that we don't know the solutions to this problem. We know the solutions, they're just not being implemented. So the thing you can do is to not accept this is the way things are and put pressure on your elected officials to implement the policies that we know will solve this problem. Such as creating more low-income, permanent low-income housing in New York City. Right now, the mayor of New York City has a plan to build 300,000 units of affordable housing. The trick is how you define affordable. So a good portion of those units, about 20% of them, are for people who can pay $2,500 a month or more on rent. That's not affordable housing.
Right.
That doesn't help the people we serve at the Coalition for the Homeless. And what we're trying to pressure the mayor to do is to set aside 10% of those units for homeless families. And he's resistant to that. He's committed to half that number, but that's not going to move the needle. The city has the resources to do this. And we've seen historically that this works. So what we need is more pressure from New Yorkers to tell the mayor, no, we want you to solve the problem. This is a unique historic opportunity to do something about homelessness, and it's an opportunity that's being squandered.
But wasn't there also this notion, and you can describe the history of this, where the city was compelled to give direct cash stipends to people to maintain their leases and hold on to their rent-controlled or rent-stabilized buildings, because the notion was that once they had a home, they had a lease, and they couldn't pay for it, and once they were kicked out of that space, that's when they fell through the cracks and became homeless.
Sure, and
it was cost effective to just give them the money and keep them there.
Very cost effective. And the city is doing a better job at eviction prevention than it has in my lifetime. A few years ago, there were 29,000 households evicted in 1 year in New York City. That was in 2015, I believe, or 2015. The city now has been giving more families who are being threatened with eviction prevention grants to help them stay. It's just a one-time grant. And that figure has gone from 29,000 down to 18,000. So that's 11,000 families who would have become homeless, who are not homeless because we're keeping them in their homes. The average amount of money it takes to keep a family in their home is about $5,000 to $6,000. Once a family becomes homeless, it costs taxpayers about $84,000 to keep that family in emergency shelters. Yeah. And forget about the cost effectiveness of this. It's inhumane to let people become homeless when you can do something about it. These are mostly women and kids.
Ryan, you said you've been doing this work since you were a teenager. How did you get involved as a teenager?
I was afraid you're going to ask that. So I was in Sunday school class, and they were passing around a sign-up sheet for the local shelter, and I saw it, and I didn't know what the shelter was, but I saw that none of the boys had signed up, and all the girls had. And that's why I went the first time, trying to get a date. But when I got there, it was very, very different from my suburban upbringing, and there was more diversity, and there was mental illness right there, and there was substance abuse right there in my face, and even as a 13-year-old, there was something that just, I liked being there, and so I kept going, and I'm still there.
Over time, what has changed, and what has been stubbornly persistent?
The population has changed dramatically. The percentage of women has increased. The percentage of children has just exploded. The first time we had a child in our shelter, it made the front page of the newspaper, and tonight I bet we have 50 in the shelter, and it's not newsworthy anymore. The percentage of individuals who have employment, back in the early 80s, virtually nobody in our shelter had any employment. Now the vast majority of them are working full-time or part-time. And so the demographics and what homelessness looks like in our country, to David's point earlier, has just dramatically changed. We've watched this issue, this crisis evolve and become, because we're not doing enough to stop it.
Got another question for you, Emilio. Are any of the actors homeless?
Sure. We invited individuals experiencing homelessness in Cincinnati to participate. And again, it was the criteria was once the lockdown happens, there needs to be consistency, and I need to count on you to come back tomorrow and the next day because there needs to be that continuity. So that was okay to many of them, but then when I talked about the nudity, it became another issue. But at the end of the day, we were joined by several individuals who said, yes, I'm in, and sometimes joined later, guys who'd say, hey man, do you have a job for me? And I said, yes, we do. So come and join us. And yeah, so they are depicted on screen, and they all of them just did a remarkable job.
This is a question for you, Emilio, and also for you, David, and Ryan, and Alec Baldwin here. I've been listening very closely to your language, and you've been saying people experiencing homelessness.
Right.
What's the right thing to say? What's the right language to use?
We talk about this specifically. Again, when we started going out on this tour, I would say, and homeless people, and there was pushback. You can't identify them as that. You have to say individuals experiencing homelessness. But then we had a sidebar conversation with it about it, and you've pushed back against that, correct? And
I think language matters, absolutely. Language matters, and how we think about the issue is defined partially by our language. Though with the tens of thousands of individuals experiencing homelessness that I've met over the decades, not a single one cared how you spoke about them. They care about how you speak to them. And so that's really been my focus, is let's focus on how we interact with individuals versus just making sure that we use the right language.
Mm.
What do you think, David?
Well, the term homeless person does conjure up an image in most people's minds because you relate it with what you see every day, right? So any of us, when we're commuting to work in the morning, going shopping, whatever, we see homeless people on the streets. That's what we think of as a homeless person. Now, those are homeless people in New York City, and that is a part of the problem, but it is really just a tiny, tiny part of the problem in New York City. And the people you see on the streets are actually not representative of homelessness in New York City. Nobody knows exactly how many homeless people are on the streets. The city does a count. It's not a very good count. They say 4,000. It's probably twice that. But for every person on the streets, there are 10 times that many in the shelters tonight. Tonight, there are 64,000 people sleeping in 467 homeless shelters in New York City. 3/4 of those are members of homeless families. It's mostly women and kids. There's 23,000 kids sleeping in homeless shelters tonight, and most of those are age 6 and below. That's not what you think of when you think of homelessness. If you want to think of what a homeless person in New York City looks like, think of a 6-year-old girl in a shelter. That's what homelessness in the city looks like. And then for every one of those people in the shelter system tonight, there are 25 times that many people just teetering on the verge of homelessness, living doubled and tripled up in substandard or illegal housing, who are just trying not to fall into the ranks of people in the streets and shelters.
How many shelters are there in the 5 boroughs?
467.
467 shelters? Yeah. Oh, I didn't know. Yeah. Well, how would you describe people, I'm curious, how would you describe people who won't go to shelters? Like if you have people who are like chronically, we have people, I live in the East Village off of Washington Square, and we have an assortment of people who, that's their spot. And they've been there winter, spring, summer, fall for multiple years, some of them.
Yeah, and we talk to those folks every night, and the city has a pretty robust outreach program to try to get people to come in. Those people who are on the streets tend to have a much higher incidence of mental illness and substance use, physical disabilities, and for the most part, those folks have been in the shelter system, but they've found it hard to negotiate the rules of the shelter system, or they've been preyed upon by other people, or they've just heard things about it that make them not want to go into it.
Sure.
There are better solutions for folks like that. There's low threshold shelters like the kind that Ryan runs that have less rules, make it easier for street homeless people to come in and start to access services. And there's a solution called supportive housing. That's permanent housing with on-site supportive services. It's a great model for homeless people with mental illness and other disabilities. We've been doing it in the city now for about 25 years, and it's economically beneficial. For every person, for every mentally ill homeless person you place in permanent supportive housing, it saves taxpayers about $10,000 a year. People stay stabilized for the long run, and actually the property values in the neighborhoods where you build supportive housing goes up. So it's win-win-win. So we put a lot of pressure on the mayor and the governor to build more supportive housing, and we did get the mayor a couple of years ago to commit $2.6 billion, the governor to commit to some amount of money. It's a little tricky with him to know what he means. But the city and state have committed to building 35,000 units of supportive housing for homeless mentally ill people. That's statewide, most of it in New York City. But of course, now it's all caught up behind the politics and the bureaucracy, and it's taking a long time for it to ramp up and come online. But once we see that happening, we will hopefully see fewer homeless people on the streets.
Ryan, I want to help you bring this back around to the movie, because one of the things that you work on and you do is you help librarians understand and help train them and give them guidance on things that they can do and ways that they can be effective. Would you share a couple of things that you share with librarians?
Wow, I do like a 10-hour training, but I'll try to condense it down into a few seconds. A lot of it is how to get ahead of problems. So when you're talking to someone who has, suffering from paranoid schizophrenia or profound addiction or trauma, there's a lot more potential volatility there. And so if a librarian can get ahead of that, build a little bit of a relationship before there's a problem, it's a lot easier to de-escalate crisis later, and thus nobody gets banned from the library, nobody gets the police called, nobody has to barricade the doors and get naked. None of those things just don't happen, sorry.
This one's for you, Emilio. This is now your second movie where you spend the majority of the film in a library.
That's right, yeah. It's been almost, 35 years. Next year will be 35 years, yeah. How did that happen?
What memories of going to the library do you have from growing up?
Well, certainly not like this. This is, the library was always a very safe space. It was a place where I could get lost in the stacks. It was a place where I could stay curious. And before Google, before the internet, you would go to the library and you would look up words, and you, on your way, going through the dictionary, in searching for that word, you might stop along the way 10 times and absorb all of those words you weren't looking for. And the same with an encyclopedia. So for me, the library was a great place where my curiosity was always stoked and always encouraged by the librarians in our neighborhood.
Have you read this book, Palaces for the Few?
I'm in it right now, yes.
This is a great
social
book.
Infrastructure.
And the author really argues about how the library
the cornerstone of the social infrastructure, which we must build upon and continue to fund, that it's so critical.
We are almost out of time. So you know what I want to do? I want to go down the row and just, whatever your final thought is on the evening, on the film, on the issue, what's on your mind?
So tell people about the movie. They've talked about the budget. There's not the advertising budget. It has to be grassroots, which means he did the first 12 years of work. You guys have to do the next piece. And certainly tell people that it's an important movie, that it's important for the dialogue that we have to take forward, but also tell them it's just a damn good movie, because as they talked about, oftentimes this issue doesn't sound entertaining, and yet this movie is profoundly entertaining. So go tell people to see this movie.
Final thoughts, Emilio?
Well, I would hope too that the film, in addition to being seen, people who come out of it park their bias at the door when they see someone on the street suffering from this situation. Oftentimes we'll assign a story about how a person arrived at that unfortunate place, and we couldn't be more wrong. And so I think we need to get to that place where we need to park that bias at the door and start looking at these individuals as human beings that they have a name and a face and a family, hopefully, and let's support them rather than turning a blind eye.
Alec?
Well, I was going to say what he said about spread the word to your friends, because we are oddly in a very word-of-mouth business right now. People saying, telling their friends that they really enjoyed something and saw it is very powerful. But also I want to say that a lot of people, you know, we live in New York where people have a lot of, some people live in homes where you might have a room dedicated to getting work done and having privacy and being able to concentrate, being able to go on that journey of the mind that libraries were designed for. You know, and a lot of people don't have that opportunity. A library is still a place, a sacred place to go and to concentrate and have the freedom to concentrate. I've got 4 children, 5 and under. So there's very little opportunity to concentrate in my home and escaping to somewhere where I can have the freedom to just let my mind go where I want to, or even if I'm just reading a copy of The New Yorker, you know, a place that's a sacred place to have peace and quiet and to go on that journey. Emilio and I were saying a while back that my friend said to me that libraries were the most reasonably priced form of travel you could ever imagine. You can go to all these places and enjoy all these things and learn all these things and have the freedom to do that. So even though libraries might not be something you avail yourself of, like public schools, a lot of people don't go to public schools in New York, they go to private schools, but nonetheless we have an obligation to provide an education to everybody. I think we have an obligation to provide that sacred space that's represented by a library to people as well.
And you said something, Alex said something yesterday that I thought was terrific when he said there is no first class in libraries, right?
Yeah. It's a space which is a very democratized space.
And David, I'll let you have the last word.
Sure. You know, the movie did a really wonderful job of introducing you to the various characters in it. And when it opens up, you see a bunch of homeless people standing outside of the library, and you think there's a bunch of homeless people. And as the movie plays out, you get to know a bunch of them and see that there's so much more there, that they have lives, they have wants, they have desires, they have plans. Just try to keep that thought in mind as you see homeless people on the streets, that everybody out there is somebody's mother, father, brother, sister, son, or daughter, and they all have stories as compelling as the story in the film that you just saw. Every single person out there is deserving of our compassion. Every single individual out there matters. We shouldn't be comfortable walking by a single person. It's okay to give people a few bucks out of your pocket. People always ask me that, should I or shouldn't I do it? It's fine to do it. If you're not comfortable doing it, don't do it. It's fine. If you see somebody who looks like they're in distress, call 311, let the city know. They'll send outreach workers to go and help them. But it's okay to do something about it, and it's not hard to do something about it. And I think we left a bunch of flyers out in the lobby that it just says, what to do if? And it sets out a bunch of scenarios. What do I do if I see a homeless person on the street who looks cold? What do I do if I see somebody who the police are hassling? What do I do if I see somebody who looks like they're about to die? And it gives you very short, quick answers for that. So you can get that sheet out there, or go to our website, coalitionforthehomeless.org, and get it off of that. But the trick is just to do something and remember the humanity of all of those people you see, as Emilio said.
So spread the word about the movie, park your bias, libraries are sacred, and homeless people are people.
That's it.
Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.